And so we're thrilled to have here today my colleague, Christian Davenport, the Walgreen Professor for the Study of Human Understanding, for his talk titled "The Revolution Will Not Be Studied, or Will It? Social Change, Social Science, and the Unlikely Connection Between the Two." Christian invites us to talk about what strategies work and do not work for bringing about social, economic, and political change, and how social science can play a crucial role in advancing those interests, despite not often being seen that way. So I personally cannot wait, and thank you, Christian.
So this is not an easy topic to broach because Rob left it open for me to kind of like structure it as I saw fit. And so that lack of narrowing does not help. But, and then it was kind of also an issue of, I could talk about what I want to talk about. And then I was trying to figure out, okay, what would it have been nice to hear when I was kind of like beginning, and what would I've been able to hear had someone said it to me. So that kind of initial framing kind of got me there in many respects. And so I'll give you a little bit of kind of like what I think I might have been able to hear. And then I'll push a little bit on what you think you might want to know, and then push you further to think about what it is that you don't know to ask, but that you should, and then move on that one as well. So growing up in New York City, I was exposed to the variation that exists in a late capitalist developed kind of society, and then saw that range of experience, and then was automatically kind of like, okay, this is not at all something that somebody should be able to live through and accept the inequality. So moving from 103rd Central Park West to 24th and 2nd in Manhattan to Stuyvesant Town, and then Battery Park City. I saw a range of the island, and you go from, I'm saying, my mother was a dancer with Alvin Ailey for a bit, and then a bunch of other modern dance, and then Broadway, and then some other stuff. But that sounds much nicer than it actually is, because dancers in particular, but entertainers in general, it's a bizarre, I mean, you're basically lower working class, but you have this exposure to these incredibly wealthy people who are sponsoring the arts. And so you come to see it very clearly that you did not come in a limo, and that you are not leaving in one, and that you're returning back on the train to where it is that you live. And folks were talking about where they were going in the Hamptons or where they were going in Martha's Vineyard. So you got exposed to inequality very easily. And you're just kind of like, well, damn, where'd they get that money from? And why is there this gap? And exactly what should we do with it? And so by the time I got to undergrad, I was very much already aware of the inequalities, and then got exposed to some particular things. I went to Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, which was, it had the first kind of like rigorous program in studying genocide. And so was there for that formation, and kind of got interested in that topic at that time. And then also Cynthia Enloe, who's, the nice way to say it is she's a radical feminist in IR. And one of the only ones, actually. And so I took a class with her called Revolution and Systems Change, where we were interviewed by the CIA 2 times after some classes, because Cynthia brought in some people from Latin America that were basically banned from the US. And so we shouldn't have been talking to them, or they shouldn't have had exposure to us. And it was a phenomenal lecture and experience, because some Sandinistas, some individuals from Cuba who were talking about revolution and change, and you're just going like mind blown. You were like, okay, this is really great. And so I leave undergrad with an interest, and it's like, okay, so one class, and one of the speakers made the comment very clearly that it's like the greatest advancements in human civilization have emerged from social movements, revolutions, insurgencies, and thus I was kind of like, well, why don't we have more of them? So that's why I went to grad school. In grad school, I discovered Well, we don't have more of them, and they're not as successful when they do come out because there's this entity called the state whose job it is to make sure these things don't get off the ground and destroy them. And so my interest then shifted a little bit to state repression, acknowledging that I was always interested in what brings forward political, economic, and social cultural change. And so there wasn't much on state repression in the 80s. And so I'm in grad school in the mid to late 80s. This is year 32 for me doing this social science business. So in grad school, going through the process of trying to figure out like what it is that I want to do. Cause like I went there to study social movements. There's no social movements people in my department. So I ended up hanging out in sociology and then get exposed to a bunch of world systems and class analysis people. So there's this Emmanuel Wallerstein is there, who studies kind of world systems theory, if you're familiar with this. There's Jim Petrus, Giovanni Arrighi, who do class analysis and global revolutions. And so it's a phenomenal group. And political science was all about the correlates of war, because basically a bunch of people who were at Michigan had just come to take over the department at Binghamton University, where I was at grad school. And I didn't know that sociologists don't necessarily like political scientists, and this particular group hated each other. And I was like, the sociologists had very interesting ideas, but really no methods on how to study anything. The political science had methods, but they had no deep theoretical understanding about why conflict was taking place. And so in my imagination, the combination of the two was going to make this phenomenal understanding of the world. And I was ready to kind of do that, and then got caught up in all types of dynamics. But I also had an interest very specific in Black Panthers at the time and their interaction with law enforcement in the Bay. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll do something on that. And I was trying to kind of situate and understand exactly how the Black liberation struggle within the US in the late 60s and late 70s kind of fit within global patterns of anti-colonialism. And that's the kind of space that I was in until I ended up at a barbecue of the political science department. So I'm assuming since Rob invited me and he knows how I generally am, I have honesty suppression problems. So if you invite me into a space, I'm going to give you all the information and tell you exactly what that experience was like. And then you will deal with it as you see fit. If you have any further questions, then I will further elaborate. So correct. Very good. So I end up at a barbecue, and there's this guy named Rick Hofferberg. Rick's dead now. I know I said this when he was alive too, but I was a TA for Hofferberg. And to give you some context of what Rick Hofferberg is like, the university had just said that the Klan could not be brought on campus. They explicitly identified that the Ku Klux Klan could not be brought onto Binghamton's campus. Rick, being Rick, was like, well, you can't tell me what I could do in my classroom. So he invited the local chapter in. As his TA, I was like, okay. But Rick was very clear. You don't show up to the class, you're not getting paid. So I'm like, okay. So I show up. It turned out to be the best thing ever. I was like, oh, we shouldn't have the Klan. We shouldn't expose the kid. No. Everyone should be exposed to someone from the Klan. It was the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. They went on ideas about mud people and how Black folk were created literally from mud. And I'm just like, how does that fit with anything? And they were just kind of like, oh, and then they were distinct species. And you're just like going, wow, none of this makes sense. And then when we got to the Q&A, it was just like an onslaught. There was like 120 kids that were asking these stupid Klansmen, because I've subsequently met smarter Klansmen, but stupid Klansmen just getting attacked on every single thing that they were talking about it. And you leave that going, wow, this particular orientation just makes no sense whatsoever. And wow, this is fantastic. And so that's Rick. So when I end up at the barbecue and cautiously eating my sandwich, Rick walks up, and Rick is just like, oh, this is like your second year at Christian. So direct quote. So which American city or African country are you going to study? And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? He's like, well, I heard you were interested in conflict and violence. I'm like, how do you get from I'm interested in conflict and violence to American city or African country? So he's like, oh, I just assumed. And I'm just like, oh, that's what's up. So in my mind, from that point forward, I'm just like, okay, you know what? One, I'm not gonna tell anybody squat about what I'm actually thinking. Two, I'm gonna study the globe. No one's gonna stick me into some little box. It's not gonna be an urban box. It's not gonna be an African box. I'm gonna study everybody. So partly that was a function of my interacting with these global sociologists, right? So world systems theory is how all nations of the globe, how all political and economic and social cultural processes fit together in some dynamic fashion. So I'm already there. Correlates the War Project is studying war everywhere. So I'm already there, but I do have this other interest. So when I realized that other interest fit directly in Rick's conception of what it is that I should do and who I should be, I was like, this is where the New York part becomes relevant. The minute I feel like someone's attempting to put me in a box, I'm like, forgive me, I'm like, F you, I'm gonna do what it is I'm gonna do. So I was like, okay, oh, you think I need to study like Oakland? Forget that, I'm gonna study the globe. And then you could try to figure that out later on. So this ends up being like professionally a phenomenal move for me. One, I think it made me more theoretically adept at understanding what was going on. The methods that I learned in that particular context, as opposed to staying urban or staying in a geographic location, then led me in this different trajectory. But to be clear, my interest was again on advancing and improving the situation politically, economically, and social culturally. Now that becomes relevant later on because in order to study this phenomena, in order to study any phenomena in social science, you need some cash. In order to get this cash, you need to frame it properly. And you need to frame it in a way that somebody's going to fund. And there's no radical organizations out there that are giving out research money. So you're going to need to get some research organization who's going to be like, oh, okay, that sounds like a reasonable thing. I'm gonna pay for that, and not necessarily know what they're paying for. So the money thing comes for me a little bit later on. But identifying that mainstream funding organizations don't really care that much about change. And the change they do care about is moderate. It's reform. It's that generally everything is okay. And if we tweak a couple of things, you'll be good. This is not my understanding. This is not what I believe was necessary, but this becomes useful later on, as I'll identify. So there's this delicate balance that needs to be maintained. Questions reasonable, methods appropriate. And fundamentally, you need to basically be pitching and selling and understanding how other people are going to be reading your particular research agenda and reading the work. And so I became adept at that, but largely it was framed in this context of, I understood the hostile nature of the environment, AKA Rick. Rick was very helpful for informing me about what it is I was about to enter because no one was really clarifying this. Now, I've never been completely open about my personal political leanings, and nor do you need to be in social science in many respects. It's like, well, my personal opinion is. And so in class, my students always got frustrated. They were like, what do you think? I'm just like, no, I'm here to teach you how to think. So you want to know what I think, then you get out of this class, you receive my grade, and then we have a conversation about what I think. My job is to teach you a panoply of different ways of addressing a particular topic, of framing that topic, of methodologically figuring out what's up, and then guiding you to understand exactly what your question should be, what it could be, what it is, what data you need, what methods, how to write it all up. And that was my job. And they didn't like that because they thought my job was to tell them, it's like, well, after doing this for 20 years or 15 years or 30 years, save me some time and tell me what I'm supposed to do. And I'm just like, what kind of teaching is that? I'm like, that's not the job, or what you think the job is. And so there was always, so if you go to, I forgot what it's called, where like students evaluate your teaching and stuff like that. I am the epitome of dichotomous. I'm either the greatest person on the planet, or I should be fired immediately and removed from my institution. That's my distribution. And I'm like, that works perfectly well for me, because that's exactly how I felt about much of the stuff that I was doing. But so today I want to discuss a little bit about how I got started, give some examples of the stuff that I've been able to, I'll say, pull off, and then discuss a little bit about what you might want to think about as you try to move forward, if you decide to go in this path at all. So as I mentioned, I started in this class, Revolution and Systems Change. It was Cynthia Enlow. Cynthia's still alive now. She is a dear friend. I've invited her to this is job number 5 for me. So I started at the University of Houston because no one told me that I should have taken the WashU or Cornell offer. I'll talk about this later. I then go to University of Colorado. Then I go to University of Maryland, Notre Dame, and then here. We'll talk about my trajectory. We talk about that too. We talk about how I screwed up, where I did all right, where things have gone. That's job 5, but I've had 12 offers since I came out of grad school, which basically nobody helped me with. So in grad school, they're supposed to do a bunch of stuff. They didn't do that for me. So I found out a lot of stuff by myself, which is why I lead to this. I'm overly forthcoming with information because no one gave me any type of thing. So I come out of undergrad, I make the move to grad school. I learn what it is that I need to learn about repression and social movements. I'm always interested in this dynamic interaction between those who are trying to change something politically, economically, social, culturally, and those who are trying to protect the status quo. So I'm always interested in this dynamic interaction, but I come out where the field was, and the field was you study one side. So I'm studying state repression. This becomes useful later on to kind of identify what's up. So, you remember Pick a Path books when you were a kid? Pick a Path? No? Yeah, the old folks do. Okay, so younger folks just view this as like an interactive website. Okay, so Black Panthers are Republican in Africa, which I want to hear about.
Black Panthers.
So the loudest person in the room doesn't necessarily affect democracy. Everyone gets to specify exactly which way they want to go. So those who want to hear about the Panther Project, raise your hand. Those who want to hear about the Republic of New Africa, raise your hand. Okay, so we have democracy, and then we have today. And so today is not democracy. I knew you all were going to say Panthers, so we're talking about the Republic of New Africa. And when we talk about the Republic of New Africa, because nobody knows about the Republic of New Africa, and in terms of politics, the Panthers are way more conventional and way more mainstream. They believed in the Constitution, and oh, we should have these enforcements and all these equalities. No. That's how they started. We should have the Constitution. And then they end, if you look at the ideological orientations that the Panthers go through, they end with international communalism. They end with, we need a revolutionary transformation of the political, economic, and social cultural system. And so the Panthers that most people know about is the first part, and they miss this trajectory of the arc. The trajectory of the arc is extremely important because by the cohort that's at the end is not the cohort that was there in the beginning. The cohort that was there in the beginning ends up getting shot, goes to jail, die, or flee the country. And this is Huey, Bobby, and them. The end group is a group of women who are the ones who are left to take the organization. So they're thinking internationally. They've switched from bringing guns into the Capitol, which really didn't work out well for the Panthers. They go from guns in the Capitol to breakfast programs in schools and fundamentally mutual aid, the stuff that we talk about now. But forget the Panthers. You can talk about that. That's on the website. All my stuff is on my website. The Republic of New Africa, though, is different. Republic of New Africa, a group from Detroit. They believed things are so jacked up that the only thing that can happen in terms of improving Black lives is they need to secede. They need to leave. They need to leave this country. But unlike Garvey, they're not like, we're going to leave the United States proper. No, we're going to take over 5 states in the United States that are predominantly African-American already. And we're just going to have them get acknowledged by international organizations to be sovereign. So the 5-state solution is what this is referred to. The Republic of New Africa. They decide they want to secede from the United States. How are you going to get all the Black people and develop everything? Reparations. This is 1968. They're talking, okay, well, how are we going to get all the Black people from Detroit, Cleveland, all these other places to the Deep South, and how are we going to develop the infrastructure in the Deep South? Well, the racist white folk that brought us over here from Africa in the first place and treated us horribly, they should pay for this development. So, as you can imagine conceptually, has anyone heard of the Republic of New Africa? Yes, doesn't work out well for them. So that's their aspiration. Their aspiration is, okay, you know what? We would like equality, but not this equality that you're trying to give us, which is a seat at your table. We don't want your table. We don't want to be with you. We'd like to be on our own, as we are already. So we'd like to have the resources to develop the things that we would like to develop as we see fit. We would like to be sovereign. If anyone's familiar with the concept of self-determination, this is completely embodied within the Republic of Africa. So slightly not DEI-able, which is like they ain't asking for inclusion, they're asking for equality. And that is not always the same exact thing. And so in this context, they were just like, you give us the resources that we could develop, and you owe us the resources because you stripped all these resources from us and you never paid us for our labor and all these other business. So very early on. So I get to Republic of New Africa, job one, University of Houston. I get to University of Houston. Hey, look, I never been to Texas before. I traveled around the United States, but Texas is different. And it's technically the South, but it's not the South. It's Texas has got its different vibe. But I end up there and I'm just like, okay, where are the Black folk? And this is just me in New York. Well, there's Texas Southern University, which is like 3 blocks from University of Houston, historical Black college. So I go there and I'm 25 when I come out of grad school. So I'm just like, yo, what's up? And looking pretty young, I'm able to sit in classes and see what they're learning or not learning. The school sucked. The school sucked. The school was like 15, 20 years behind everything else in political science. I'm sitting in these classes going like, damn, where'd they get that from? But I finally identify myself after a couple of weeks. They're just like, oh, you went to white school. So I'm like, well, damn, yeah, technically, but I'm actually here physically in your face trying to talk with you all. And they're just like, well, why are you at that white institution? And I'm just like, y'all didn't have a job. What? So then we go from there to have this like very interesting conversation. We end up, by the time I leave, having research collaborations and so forth. And we're offering things like ICPSR, a version of it at Texas Southern to kind of get that thing moving. But while at Texas Southern, I meet this very interesting kind of like older African-American male, Amari Obadeli, who's, you know, these people who like kind of collect people. He just like, you know, he's just trying and he's just talking in a corner and then he's going on about something. And you're just like, oh, that sounds interesting. And so Amari hinted at the fact that he was connected with different aspects of the Black liberation movement as opposed to the civil rights movement. He'd be very clear about that. And then he revealed that he was from Detroit. Then he revealed that he had some documents. And so one day he like shows me a document and it's just like, it's a surveillance report. So Detroit Police Department, among 15 different agencies, had the Republic of New Africa under surveillance. They also were heavily infiltrated from the beginning. They started as the Group on Advanced Leadership, a civil rights organization, before they radicalized to figure out that this civil rights stuff's not gonna work for us. We need to have an independent state. But they had been infiltrated from the beginning. So by the time they evolved into the Republic of New Africa, they're already 1/3 federal and state and local authorities in there. And so Amari shows me one of these surveillance reports, which is basically like, I'm on her and every place she goes, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Every place she goes, we put down on a list and then that place is subsequently under surveillance. So it goes in one direction because no one ever gets off this list. The list just keeps growing. And then I'll have 7 hours on the first place she goes, and then 7 hours on the next place she goes. And then if she meets somebody, then they're under surveillance too. So this just expands for years until the group is gone. All they're doing is finding these people. So Amari shows me one document, but alludes to the fact that there's more. So I need to basically prove that I'm like legit and I'm interested in doing some stuff. And Amari wanted to see what I was doing. And so my first book, I knew that my first book was going to determine basically how people were going to view me. So despite the fact that I already had a book on the Black Panthers, I don't publish that one first. I published my human rights violations book, State Repression and Domestic Democratic Peace book, which is a global analysis of why governments engage in human rights violations. And so I do that first, and then I do the Panther book second, which is really strange, but whatever. But the Panther book shows to Amari how serious I'm going to take the documentation. So then I'm accepted by the Republic of New Africa. Evidently, there's all these voting and other things that take place within the organization. They determine that they're going to give up the records to me so that I can pass them on to other individuals and get other people interested, involved in it. Now, what happens is I basically get called and like sent to some location at like 3 o'clock in the morning. They told me to have a truck. I rented a truck. They gave me a week. We'll call you sometime within this week to pick stuff up. And so I had this huge ass Hertz truck at the time. And then I'm driving out to some place at like 3 o'clock in the morning. There's like 8 brothers that are there, all like, I don't know any of them. None of them are talking. They open up the truck. They throw all these boxes in the back and they're just like, okay, you got 3 months until you have to get this back to us. I'm just like, okay, get back to the house. And I'm like, what am I going to do with a truckload of 80 boxes? And I'm like, so I take one box up to my house, I lock the thing, I'm like going through the papers, I strewed out all over my living room, and then I realized what it is that I have. And it's all the documents from all the surveillance reports, all the arrest reports, all the agent provocateur discussions. So there's informants and agents provocateur in the social movement organization. The informant is just identifying other people. The agent provocateur is trying to get you to do something illegal so I can arrest us all later on. All these records are in there. Nothing's redacted. It's all right in front of me. And I'm just like, oh, damn, that's one box out of 80. And so I'm like, I need some help. And so this is my first Public in New Africa NSF grant. I write an NSF grant. I'm like, where do you get money? Houston is very clear. There's 3 places you publish. There's 1 place you get money. That's what I was told. And so I'm like, okay, how do you get money? How do you write an NSF grant? So I contact my colleagues. I'm just like, can I see your successful ones? And they're just like, okay, here's a bunch of successful ones. So I look at 12 NSF grants and I'm just like, okay, I can write this up. I write it up, show it to some of my colleagues, get some comments, get funded. You'd think that would be a good thing. I submitted my grant to political science. I received an acceptance from underrepresented minorities and underrepresented scientists and underrepresented minority scientists and engineers. So I don't know about you, but that don't sound like political science. So I was like, yo, what's this? So I'm just like, I submitted to political science. Who is this group? So I'm just like, I've never heard of this group before. I didn't submit this. I didn't submit my application to these people. So I'm like, yo, forget this. I'm walking away. I don't need this crap. I'm just like, I submitted to political science. Political science should be accepting me. So I hadn't figured out NSF right. NSF was kind of like, okay, so political science likes their money. So is there another way that we can fund some projects and I keep my money in political science? And there's an underrepresented minority group that's giving out money. So they're just like, oh, it's a Black topic. We could take it. Political science can keep their money. We'll spend it. They weren't necessarily thinking about how I'd respond to it. And so I respond later on how I actually felt at the moment. But at the time, I'm just like, well, damn, I'm taking the money so I can get this project done. And then do the analysis and then get the publications and it's fine. And NSF does not hear from me directly about how offended I was by this bait and switch, because no one explained anything to me, because they were just like, oh, he'll get the money. They didn't care that I was upset, that I was just like, I'm like, yo, but I didn't submit to you all. What is this? What is this crap? So then I'm just kind of like trying to fit there and just go, okay, exactly. How do I then navigate this space, right? And so now I got the Republic of New Africa documents. That's part of my Radical Information Project, which I create. I still have the Panther documents because the Panther project led to this other thing that I was trying to figure out. So then it becomes this really long, detailed discussion of, okay, how am I going to try to figure out, how can I explore these issues of bringing forward kind of like radical political, economic, social, cultural change, getting the resources to do it, publishing in venues that matter for political scientists who will be subsequently evaluating me for what's going on. And so there's a bunch of stuff that I'm trying to balance, which I think many of my other colleagues were not necessarily having to balance because they weren't necessarily in the same exact space. I had an added thing where now the Republic of New Africa, in addition to the Black Panther Party and every other Black Liberation Army organization, are now evaluating me to try to figure out what it is I'm going to do with these documents. So every now and then I'm receiving some call or somebody walks up on me and be just like, yo, brother, what's up? And I'm like, what you mean, what's up? He's like, well, I'm part of the All African People's Republic, and why aren't you doing something on us? Or that brother that you talked about was actually informant, so why aren't you? So I'm like, now I'm getting assaulted by different social movement organizations, which never even occurred to me. But nevertheless, I'm like navigating that and proceed. So meanwhile, I think I gave you the institutions that I moved to and from. But while I'm doing that, I'm writing, I'm getting grants, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what's going on and where I fit. Of course, the Republic of New Africa is in the United States. So my principal area is international relations and world politics. So I'm doing this US related stuff and I'm not even talking about it. I'm just going about my international research agenda and publishing in that stuff. And I'm publishing stuff and I'm writing stuff and I'm getting grants on this American stuff, but I don't talk about it for like 10 years. The first 10 years I'm in the profession, I don't talk about it at all. I'm just writing, I'm just doing it. Because as far as anyone else is concerned, I'm a scholar in international relations and world politics. Now, to be clear, there's like 5 of us that are doing anything that's rigorous. And one, Errol Henderson, who came from Michigan, also bald brother, is in a weird space because I literally had a shirt that said the other Black person in international relations. Because we'd end up in conferences and folks were just like, oh, Errol. I'm like, wrong one. Because there was only 2 of us. And so then it was an issue of like, okay, so now what do we do? So I end up having this project later on where I'm trying to identify later undergrads and grad students and converting them from being in American politics where for those that were in the room, there was 30 of us that went to International Studies Association meeting. There's 30 of us that were there and we were talking about problems in international studies, international relations. And many of the people were saying, you know, I'm done. I'm defecting, I'm going to American. And we're just like, yo, what's up? And they're just like, we're gonna feel more comfortable in that space. There's a space for us there. There's not a space for us here. There's just a presumption that there's certain things that we're supposed to do, Rick Hofferberg, there's certain things that we're supposed to do in this space, and I don't wanna do that. But if I go to American, there's resources, there's jobs, and I'm just like, yo, there's jobs in IR. It's like, look at Errol and myself, look at Kathy Powers. And they're just like, oh, y'all are the rarity. I'm just like, you're supply and demand. It's like, American has an overabundance of Black folk that are studying these topics. There's very few of us that are in an IR world. And guess what? Our questions are different. The methods are the same. The questions that we ask are different. Our perspectives on what it is that we're looking at is different. And so product differentiation, right? I was just like, I'm like, yo, I knew enough about econ to be like, if you're a rare polka dotted rhinoceros over here, you're going to be incredibly valuable on the market as opposed to being one of many individuals that's over here. And so I then step out. If anyone's seen this movie Apocalypse Now, there's a line in there where it goes, first he stepped away from them and then he stepped away from himself. And so I found myself following what it is that I wanted to pursue and didn't really care about how anybody else was seeing it. And that worked out in terms of my market position because no one else was doing the stuff that I was doing. But I ended up in a space where you had to get used to like being on your own. So this one I'll let you to choose actually between. So it's a project on disturbances, riots, or a project on radicalism.
Disturbances.
Disturbances. Both.
Radical.
Okay, who's going for disturbances? Who's going for radicalism? Yeah, that's pretty close. Okay, I'll do. All right, I'll do disturbances. So I ended up at Notre Dame. In part because I got tired of being in public institutions and I thought I'd give it a shot to see what a private institution would be like. One of my boys was there, Darren Davis, because the way that Notre Dame works is if you're Catholic, which I'm not, but my mom was. And so since they knew the family connection, that's sufficient. And it's just like, yo, that's illegal. No, they can hire whom they wish. And this was a priority for them. So I ended up in Notre Dame and I'm just like, I never thought I'd be going to Notre Dame, but I live in Chicago, so I'm good. I can live in a city and I commute out. So I'm living in Chicago and I have a small apartment in South Bend, and academics being academics, I spend a day and a half in Notre Dame and go back to Chicago and live life. So I was like, I'm a driving fool in between the 2 locations, but I ended up at Notre Dame and there's a guy there, Dan Myers, a phenomenal sociologist, does social movement stuff with an old friend of mine, Pam Oliver. And one day, similar to Mario Verdelli, Dan hands me a piece of paper, which was an evaluation. There's this guy Lemberg who exists in the 60s. There's somebody named Spillerman that's before him, and Spillerman identifies these 400 riots that exist. I do the quotes because no one refers to themselves as a rioter. This is all the instruction from the state. The state identifies the category, the state studies it, the state identifies these people as problematic and so forth. They see themselves as rebels when they're self-identifying, but this is a different point. Spillerman identifies 400, sociologists then identify, and they're studying 400 riots thereafter. Lemberg is just like, damn, there's something up with this conceptualization. So Lemberg is just like, I don't like the threshold. The threshold is too high, and his requirements for how you become a riot, I think, are too high. So he lowers the threshold of violence, lowers the threshold of participation, and lo and behold, Lemberg identifies 4,000 of this phenomenon. And so Lemberg starts to kind of like piece things together, and he's trying to set it up, but he's not really a quantitative investigator. So he kind of really doesn't do it. So it gets passed around to a bunch of different people, and Dan ends up discovering it in Brandeis, brings it to Notre Dame. But then Dan gets hooked up in administration, so he's not going to do any more research. And he's just like, damn, who can I give this to? And he's just like, Christian, you got this radical information project. I think you're going to do this thing. So please carry this forward. So I get it. And I'm like, same with Oberdelli. I'm like, damn, what the hell do I do with this? Then I start looking at all the documentation, all the stuff that they have. I need some help. I get another grant. This grant is to understand what disturbances are. This grant is to understand exactly how they vary across space and time. And so I get caught up in that, but then I get the call in Michigan. So then I come here. So then I'm like, my dynamic is perturbed. So I give it up. And then I come here, and then Elizabeth Hinton, who was at Harvard at the time, came across my archive upstairs, actually, and wrote this book, America on Fire, which then becomes like a national bestseller. And now we're working on some stuff because I'm like, I had some problems with what she did, but I'm all good because I'm fulfilling this promise that I made to kind of get this information out to people and proceed to do that rather well. Now, along with this kind of trajectory of sorts, I end up doing what I never actually imagined that I would be doing, which is kind of archival work, more broadly conceived. As you've been able to identify, I'm a collector of people's data. People go through all types of efforts to collect and compile information. They don't always know what to do with it. And sometimes they hand that over to people, and then we figure out what we could do with it. And so in line with the conversations about like reparations in the United States, and which our Black people do, and our poor white people do, or Latinos do, I'm like, I think everybody's do, but I think capitalism is the harm, which is a separate point. But there's a whole bunch of data, because there's people who are like, oh, what's the after effect of lynching on the Obama vote? What's the after effect of slavery on blah, blah, blah? And I'm just like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that was done against Black folk in particular. And I'm just like, well, let's take all of that together. And does all of that together reveal anything? Do all those different forms and manifestations of discrimination and violence and hostility, do they fit together and conceptually? Now, so racism leads you in this direction, right? Where you're just kind of like, but racism gets to, it's the intent of the person that's doing it. And I think that's highly problematic because a bunch of people show up for some horrible stuff that have nothing, they're there to be with their friends. They don't have any animus or some other group. So thinking about that is irrelevant. I'm just like, okay, so a individual gets lynched, they get beaten, they get set on fire, they get decompartmentalized physically, and then they get shot in the end. Does everybody that's in the lynch group have to hate Black people? I'm like, no, that person was still lynched. So I'm just like, so I start studying events, but then I realized there's a whole bunch of different types of events. Anyone know what an outrage is? An outrage is what happened right after slavery, when white people got so upset that I was like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing because it's just like as someone from the Freedmen's Bureau decided to call this an outrage. I'm just like white people just got so incensed that they had to kill some Black people. And I'm like, damn, it's that jacked up. But there's a whole listing of outrages that came out that were being documented. And I'm like, okay, so should outrages be related to lynching? Conceptually, it seems like it should fit. How about to redline, not letting Black people live in your neighborhood? How about to not let Black people vote? So we put them all together and created this anti-Black index, which is just like how everything fits together and exactly how you can understand all of it. And so you can, on this website, I'll send this to Rob, but you could just pick a county. And it shows you the trajectory of anti-Black behavior over time. It's good, this is bad. Trajectories vary. There's 5 different trajectories that we see. We're now studying these things. What leads to particular trajectories? What's the after effects of the trajectory?
The left is good or not?
Left is good, right is bad. And so we're in that space. I also get a van from the university to basically start doing archival work. I'm starting in Michigan. I'm going to the worst and the best, and to do archival work in these individual locations, again, to uncover and reveal this particular history to better understand what's going on. But to discuss briefly what remains to be done and to think about your kind of like next generation type of thing. A couple of things. One, as I mentioned, I've been doing this for 32 years. And so I'm kind of, I'm done. I'm done with violence and conflict. I'm like, I put in time, I've documented it. So at my birthday next year, which is June 4th, I'm done. I'm not doing any more new violence and related concepts. I'm actually moving to political love, because this is like a healing project for me. It's like, what is it? Like Gandhi talked about it, King talked about it. I'm like, but there's so little on love and there's so much on violence and conflict that I'm just like, you know what? I'll end on that particular note. So, but my archival stuff continues. There's 5 books I'm working on right now, right? I said no new projects, right? So I'm finished off a bunch of stuff as it relates to that. But as it relates to that, I think there's a tremendous amount of work with regards to the magnitude and type of Black progress, thinking about equality, thinking about exactly what it is we should be trying to identify, of how things have gone. And we're not really good with discussing exactly what equality means, political, economic, or social, cultural. We talk about different aspects of it, but nothing as uniform or as concrete as we have in terms of political engagement. And I think there's reasons for that. I've repeatedly raised the issue of the usefulness of Black politicians, which is not something my colleagues necessarily care for, because I'm questioning a whole battery of research. I'm just like, okay, what locations in the United States are better and why? And did Black politicians help get us there? Now, what I noticed about John Lewis after he died, we spent more time talking about what John Lewis did in his 20s than he did talking about what he did in his 40s, 50s, and 60s, which is kind of sad. And a large part of that is because of the limitations of what political systems were able to pull off. I think we need to continue to raise this question, right? We also don't raise this question, which is, and this back to Republic of New Africa. If we want to talk about options, if we want to talk about equality, then we might get to a certain point where we're just like, okay, you know what? Certain people in this country, the United States, might not be able to get any equality. And so maybe they need to leave. One of my best friends is an immigration lawyer. His new practice, which got started in the pandemic, was placing African Americans in other nations around the globe, in part because our discrimination and the violence directed against us relative to other asylum cases internationally is so well documented. 400 people he's placed elsewhere in the throughout the globe from the United States already. And so there's a bunch of questions that we just don't necessarily ask, which I find myself now moving towards and then facilitating. And then this archival stuff, not everyone views themselves as an archivist, but everyone in their family has somebody that's kept some records or some material, which we're going to try to basically extract and pull people together on. I'll end with my van. But if there's any questions in the meantime.
Thank you.
That is the van.
Can you show that data again that you had, the charts? So first of all, I referred to Christian like the Dos Equis commercial, the most interesting political scientist in the universe. We're always really glad to have him here. And every time I hear him speak, I hear more amazing things. This project is amazing to me. If you're doing you're here at summer, in the summer program doing quantitative work. This is measurement models and data science combined here, where we're building up this anti-black index, which you can then track over time. You take your time series. I'm glad we recorded this so that folks can sit down and see how Christian made a career being an insurrectionist while working within the system to tremendous success. I don't know how he did that. I'm going to have to pour through the recording and decipher the secret steps to success that he uncovered. But thanks for coming. We appreciate it. Questions?
My question is, how is anti-blackness or like anti-black defined in the index?
So, so unlike racism or discrimination or many of these other concepts, I don't care what the perpetrator does. I don't care what they think. Sorry, I care what they do. I don't care what they think. And so this is the difference between. It's even caught within the concept of genocide as well, right? Intent gets wrapped up into it. And I'm like, that leads us to this amazing like thicket, right? I'm just like, I don't know what's in your brain. I'm like, I know what you do. I see this person on fire. What your intent, I mean, that's where things get awry, right? So I'm just like, Bernard Goetz from New York shot these Black youth in a train because he said he felt threatened. So then the trial became not about the 4 Black kids that he shot, but Bernard Goetz's intent. I'm just like, how are we supposed to get that? We're looking through old letters. I'm just like, get out of here. These kids are dead. I'm like, yo. So so the index is basically, it's all behavior. So it's just like, okay, have you banned Black people from doing this? It's lynchings, it's police shootings, it's restriction of felons being able to vote. It's just like, and what I find most interesting is we render the whole thing, our whole project is an empirical question. We're just like, okay, we have all these different manifestations of things that have been done against Black folk. And technically, I think this could be applied to any other community, right? So we could have an anti-Semitism index, we could have an Islamophobic, we could do this for any group. But we have all these behavioral manifestations, and then we're just like, are they related to one another? Revealing that there is a single or multidimensional component to the anti-Black behavior. And they do fit together. So it's possible that they don't fit together, right? It's possible that the lynching is not overlapping in any way, shape, or form with outrages or rape during slavery. I have some stuff I'm doing on rape during slavery. I'm just like, it's possible that these things are revealing distinct dimensions, gender dimensions, spatial, temporal. They fit together, and we're like, oh damn, didn't quite see that. But then it's a question of like, okay, so what's that mean? And so for me, I'm kind of like, and then you have differences, right? You'll have some place that's horrible, like off the charts horrible. It's always been bad, and there's no Black folk there. I think that's different from a place that is horrible and Black folk are there. So now we're looking at the relationship between the anti-Black index and in and out migration. It's like, and if you're white from this horrible location, and then you start to move someplace else, what does that shift in this new location? And so the project I'm working on now is, so one of the books is about explaining this index and looking at the variation. And another part of the book is looking at after effects. And one of the after effects that I'm most interested in is, okay, how does anti-Black behavior, how does the anti-Black index influence white folk? Everyone's focusing on how damaged Black folk are from being persecuted. And I'm just like, is there an effect on white folk? Is there something that fundamentally happens? Because levels of suicide, levels of depression, drug use for whites, it's off the charts. It's like, what's explaining that? I'm just kind of like, it could be that you're living in this hateful environment and that has a deleterious effect on your mental health. And I'm just like, mental research question. It's just like, what leads you in the direction of this research question? And it's just like, nobody's asking that question. It's all this symbolic crap. It's just like, oh, there was lynching in this area, so the Black people must have been really upset. I'm like, okay, empirical question, because half the Black population leaves in the Great Migration, right? But the other half stays. The group that leaves starts the Black liberation movement. The part that stays creates the civil rights movement. So I'm just like, damn, okay, so who stayed? I'm like, who stayed in the South? So a bunch of questions that we just don't ask, right? We're just like, oh, these black people voted for these black people. I'm like, I don't give a shit. I don't care about that. What I care about is just like, okay, so how do we increase the caloric intake for people in rural Mississippi? And then like, what you get from my colleagues, like, oh, is that political science? I'm just like, well, if the state is behind these people not getting food, yeah. So less meandering questions, or less meandering answers in my part. Sorry. Y'all just stunned? Come on, you got something. You got something.
What's the timeline of this, of the research or the?
1850 to 2010. This one stops at 2000, but we just updated to 2010.
And so you did mention like different communities. Have you done like an overlap of communities to see if there's some consistency or some?
So I don't have it now, but so we spend a lot of time thinking about like states, right? It's like, okay, that's not a natural political entity, and it doesn't follow the constituents who are actually living or residing within this administrative unit. But we're going to redraw maps in the United States as a function of your historical experience with anti-Blackness. And so it's kind of like, and counties are artificial as well, right? So we're only able to do so much, but it's like, we're gonna redraw the map. And does anyone remember the Green Book? The Green Books were these things that came out where just like black folk wanted to travel, and they were just like, oh, what's the least racist way that we could travel through America? So we're doing an electronic Green Book, which we could do at each time period, which is we're gonna give you 2 points, and then identify for those 2 points what's the least and most racist like way you could pass through the United States, just as a spin-off project. I'm just like, once I realized, I'm like, oh, we could do a new Green Book. And now we can compare our Green Books to the actual Green Books that were generated as an external validation exercise. Because I was like, I want to do something with these Green Books. And somebody was digitizing them. But I'm like, what y'all gonna do with it? It's like, we don't know. We're just gonna digitize it for people to use. And I'm like, oh, can I get all the text from that? It's like, oh yeah, sure, you could do that. And I'm like, oh, okay, we could do this cross-validation exercise. And so for me, it becomes like really interesting. So I'm just like, so the first book is kind of like, okay, so how do you think racism or anti-Black behavior in the United States or anti-Black human rights violations, to be clear, how do you think they exist in the United States? So do you think it was like uniformly bad and then got good? And so that's why there's like 2,000 counties, right? So we have these trajectories for 2,000 different counties. I'm just like, if you just ask somebody, what does American racism look like? I think most people will be like, it's horrible. And then it gets better. Who the hell is thinking this? It's like, okay, so, and the distribution shows you the distribution is distribution across Black folk. So it's more concentrated 1850, well, because we're all in plantations, right? So of course the uniform experience. But you mean to tell me that it gets worse over time? Well, partly because in slavery, folks wanted to keep you alive. Terror was the principal mechanism of domination at the time. I want to terrorize. I'm gonna beat the hell out of you, set you on fire, make sure everybody else sees it. I'm not gonna kill everybody at both tables, because that's interfering with my bottom line. Jacked up, jacked up. But like the minute folks were seeing that things were worse after slavery, my colleagues who are all white, they were just like, yo man, I can't, we're not gonna present this. You need to present this. What you mean that slavery wasn't the worst thing? I'm just like, yo, think about it. Property, value, it's clear. Once we're no longer, this is how the new Jim Crow stuff kicks in, right? This is like, okay, we need our labor back. Okay, let's change everything so we can get them back to working. Working. Not killing, working. And progressively, Black folk become less and less necessitated for the economic system. And so they're more expendable. And thus we have Black life way less valued and more likely to be subject to some of the violent activities. But if you have 2,000 trajectories, what do you think that would look like? I'm like, I was caught. I'm like, damn, I don't know. So then I was just kind of like, oh, okay, I expect this general pattern. It goes from worse to getting better. And then there might be some regional variation. We'd expect it after the Black migration. And then it's just like, okay, so what explains the anti-Black index being high in a location that has no Black people left? Does it make sense that a high anti-Black index does not see any Black people return? So now we can study all these other types of questions because there's certain locations where there were some Black people at some time, they leave and then they never go back. How do they know not to go back? Because people still talking about the shit that happened in 1870, right? So it's just like, so every time I see it, I'm like learning something new, but then realizing I'm just like, oh, you know what? And this is part of the trajectory, right? It's like you realize at a certain point, there's no way I'm gonna analyze everything about this thing, but I'll make it available. So everybody else could have at it, which is, so Rob invites me to something where I get one person who might want to do something with the index. And then literally we'll take it on the road. We could take that van on the road and go to these locations and extract whatever information is in these communities that is not digitized currently, that people might have orally, that people might have in their attics. We're gonna take all that information, scan it, bring it back here, use that to basically understand what this thing is and allow people to digitally submit materials that they have so we can add this to the archive. Because there was a TV show called Roots that was on for like a week, and America for a moment was transfixed watching this TV show. And thereafter for like the next year or two before we realized that Alex Haley was just a liar and a fucking criminal, excuse me. But he did more damage between his Malcolm X book and Roots. He did more damage to Black folk and white folk, I think, than anything else. But for this next couple of years following Roots, everyone was all interested in history and they were trying to figure out what to do and they're trying to figure out how to communicate. But the one thing that was lacking from that period was like, not everybody could do something. With this, everybody could do something. It's like, if you're from a location, you could be part of this project and provide your information and add to this database. And then we could then figure out what we need to reconfigure or not reconfigure. But everybody could be involved in this. So now I'm trying to do this in India, Indonesia, Haiti, Colombia. Because once I saw it, I'm just like, ooh, let's go. Back to the global thing. Sorry.
All right, no, not at all. Thank you very much.